How you doing? You're very, very welcome to Tras na Tíre tonight. Tonight we have historian Seán Collins with us. He's a native of Drogheda, and he was born in Halpin Terrace. He's a graduate of UCD. He holds an MA in Modern History and is an alumni of Boston College. He regularly broadcasts on history topics. He's published on local history. He's actively engaged with all communities in Northern Ireland since long before it was fashionable, and he's also one of County Louth's best historians. The talk will present a history of the three Hannigan brothers of Angleboro in County Limerick, Donal, Donnacha and Seamus, and their involvement in the struggle for Irish independence from 1907 until 1922. I'm particularly interested in this topic as I have co-written a book about Donal Hannigan and the Louth Volunteers in 1916. Seán Collins, you're more than welcome back to Tras na Tíre tonight.
Thank you very much, Marcus, and thanks, Jim, for providing the platform once again. You're very kind to let me use Tras na Tíre. I appreciate that very much. I just want to send some greetings out to members of the O'Hannigan family who I believe are listening in, and some friends of mine from down there in Ballylanders in sweet County Limerick, as they call it. So it's important to say hello to them. Tonight, my topic, the O'Hannigan brothers of Angleboro, County Limerick, an Irish band of brothers. I hope you can stick with me. There are three of them, and it may get a little bit confusing from time to time. I actually get confused myself, but I'll ask you to do your best to bear with me. But to set the background, Angleboro is a tiny little village in Limerick. You know, Big Tom had the song about where the three counties meet. Well, he could have written it about Angleboro because it sits literally on the border of Limerick, Tipperary and Cork. It centres them all. The nearest big town is Mitchelstown, which is only a couple of miles away. So it'll give you an idea of the position of Angleboro. But the O'Hannigan brothers, James, Donal and Donnacha, were born in the village of Angleboro, County Limerick. Their parents were James O'Hannigan and Honora Cleary, who were both teenagers during the Fenian Rebellion. There were 6 children in the O'Hannigan family. There was a Patrick, Michael and Mary, as well as the other 3 boys we mentioned. Their parents were fluent in both English and Irish, and they encouraged their children to be the same. In their early years, the boys attended Guggan Irish College in Cork. In the 1901 census, James has already left home. Donal is working as a farmhand and living at the farm of Cronins of Knocknacorra, a neighbour, and Donnacha is still living at home. In 1907, Sean McDermott, recently appointed as an organiser for the IRB, came to visit the O'Hannigan household on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the death in Kilclooney Wood, 6 miles from Mitchelstown, of Peter O'Neill Crowley, a prominent Fenian. And every year there was a rally, if you like, a Fenian rally, remembering Crowley. And in the 1897 meeting, the newspapers report that upwards on 10,000 people attended. But McDermott came there in 1907 as the guest speaker. And, you know, he was now organising for a note-bound society, which some people didn't really approve of, a secret society, if you like, the IRB. So 3 months into his new role, he visited the O'Hannigans. Donal said that Donal said that his older brother, Jim, who was an advanced nationalist, the title then given to radicalised Republicans, Donal later realised the true mission of McDermott's visit was IRB recruitment. Donal moved to Dublin in 1909 and went to work with his brother Donnacha in Belcamp in North County Dublin, where Countess Markovich had set up an experimental training camp for Na Fianna, an Irish Boy Scout organisation, which Donal joined. This is a photograph of them sitting. Donal is sitting to the back and Donnacha is to the front with a gun in his hand. The brothers both joined the McHale branch of the Gaelic League while in Dublin. And Joseph O'Rourke said that when he joined the Gaelic League in 1910, he came under the influence of the O'Hannigan brothers. Douglas Hyde, the first president of Ireland and founder of the Gaelic League, Seán Kelley, the second President of Ireland, were all members of the McHale branch. He also pointed out that the O'Hannigans were now recruiting men into the IRB. They certainly moved in important circles as far as the national movement was concerned. Donal said that at this time, their main activities included destroying British Army recruitment notices and pasting their own literature on RIC barracks and stations around Raheny and Santry. In 1910, at the request of Tom Clark, he went to work on the estate of the O'Moores near Maryborough, Portlaoise, where he established a circle of IRB before returning to Dublin to work in Guinness. Back in Dublin, he rejoined the Teeling Circle of the IRB and set about reorganising it. In 1911, the Mangled Circle was formed and he transferred to it, Seán Kelley being the secretary. In Guinness, Donal recruited men into the IRB. They paid a monthly subscription of 1 shilling. And in 1912, they started to purchase small arms, revolvers, etc. Con Colbert, Sean Houston and Michael O'Hanlon worked closely with Donal as members of the Mangled Circle, based at 41 Parnell Street. They helped him establish IRB circles in Portlaoise, Kells, Mitchelstown, Naas and Ballylanders, Cork and Galbally. They were also active through 1910 and 1911 in establishing Wolf Tone clubs throughout Dublin to encourage cultural debate and spread their gospel of separatism among young people. Donal was proud to say he founded Bulfin GFC, and 14 of the team players took part in the Easter Rising. On the founding of the National Volunteers in November 1913, Donal was present and joined at the Rotunda Rink, now the site of the Garden of Remembrance. All members of the IRB had been instructed to join and infiltrate the volunteer organisation. He was a member of C Company, 4th Battalion of the Dublin Brigade. Eamon Cant was his commanding officer, and Cathal Brewer was second in command. They drilled and trained at Larkfield in Kimmage. By this time, Donal had acquired a Lee Enfield rifle and a Colt 45 revolver, which he got from Michael O'Hanlon. They were trained and drilled by Irishmen who were serving in the British Army. On Sunday, the 26th of July 1914, Erskine Childers and his wife Molly returned to Ireland from their honeymoon on board their yacht, the Asgard. They landed at Howth and brought with them 900 rifles and 29,000 rounds of ammunition for the National Volunteers. Donal marched from Kimmage with his company to Howth that day. Clark had informed them the guns were coming. Each man was given a rifle, and even though they were accosted by the authorities, they successfully got their guns safely into the city. A week after the Howth gun running, on July 26, 1914, there occurred the equally audacious gun running at Kilcoole in County Wicklow. Around midnight on August 1st, 600 German-made Mauser 71 single-shot rifles, together with 20,000 rounds of ammunition, were landed on the beach of the small North Wicklow seaside town and spirited away under the cover of darkness. They were part of the single original consignment from which 900 Mausers and 29,000 bullets were landed at Howth a week earlier. Donal also was present at Kilcoole. On his annual vacation in August of 1914, Donal was sent by McDermott to inspect the volunteer companies in Kildare, Laois, Tipperary and Cork and report back. A volunteer review or large parade was held in Limerick in late August 1914, and the three O'Hannigan brothers, Jim, Donnacha and Donal, all participated. However, war clouds were now looming and the volunteer movement would soon split on the World War I issue. Throughout 1950, Donal continued his work travelling the country, organising the IRB circles and recruiting for the newly founded Irish Volunteers, and at the same time holding down a job in Guinness. The split had seen 75% of the membership side with Redmond to support the British war effort. The remainder, of which Donal was part, as were his brothers, established the Irish Volunteers to continue their separatist agenda. As the year progressed into 1916, Donal said training became more intensive and there was little time for football and athletics, which he enjoyed. On St. Patrick's Day, 1916, the Volunteers paraded in Dublin. They were instructed to make themselves familiar with the city. James Connolly, or Jim, as Donal called him, gave them lectures on street fighting and tunnelling from house to house. Donal said it was apparent something was going to happen. 3 weeks before Easter, he was summoned to Tom Clark's shop in Parnell Street. He was instructed to resign from his job in Guinness. He was being given a command, and it would be a whole-time job for him, as something big was going to happen at Easter. Donal was given the command of Loudmead, Southdown, South Armagh, and South Monaghan, where there were over 1,300 volunteers. He was given a list of all the IRB men in the area and was instructed to base himself in Dundalk. He went to Dundalk 2 weeks before Easter and set about organising his command through a network of local companies, and he visited most of the towns in the area while keeping in regular contact with Dublin with the help and support of Patrick Hughes. Patrick Hughes was the commander and founder of the organisation in Dundalk. He had requested from headquarters some support from a military point of view, and Donal O'Hannigan was the support that they sent. On the Tuesday before Holy Week, he met Pádraig Pearse at St. Enda's, and Donal did, met Pádraig Pearse in St. Enda's in Rathfarnham, where in the presence of Seán Boylan. Seán Boylan, County Meath man, many of you would know his famous son, the manager of County Meath. If you like County Meath, I know some people don't, but he had quite a track record and would have been a close friend of the O'Hannigan family. Boylan was given orders for the rebellion. He was to mobilise, O'Hannigan was instructed he was to mobilise in Dundalk on Easter Sunday, join up with the contingents at Ardee and Slane, and meet with the Meath men on the Hill of Tara and read the proclamation. Donal believed and expressed the opinion that Tara was very much out of the way, but Pearse insisted on the basis of historical significance. He was also instructed to release the German prisoners in the camp at Oldcastle, where German nationals had been interned from the beginning of the war in 1914. And he was also presented by Pearse and McDermott with his volunteer officer's uniform. Over the next few days, Donal travelled through the command, advising the officers. Easter manoeuvres, which he said were greeted with enthusiasm. He returned to Dublin on the Friday prior to Holy Week for a final meeting with the Executive Council. He was promoted to the rank of Commandant and shook hands with each member of the Executive: Clark, Pearse, Connolly, McDermott, McDonough, Cant and Plunkett. Eamon Cant, his commander, walked Donal to the gate, advising him, "Don't let yourself be arrested, or you'll never forgive yourself." They knew what was coming. Holy Week in Dundalk would be the start of Donal's epic adventure, leading the Louth volunteers into battle. The young volunteers were quite impressed by their new commandant. Sean McEntee described him as our new temporary commanding officer was a cooper by trade, about 5 feet 10 inches in height, square-shouldered and light upon his feet. I gathered that in his day he had been a magnificent hurler. His really exceptional characteristics were his immeasurable energy, his physical stamina, and his powers of leadership and command. He was a master of everything that a competent regimental sergeant major should know about the role of the combat infantryman. McEntee said he succeeded in turning our somewhat amorphous corps into a cohesive, organised unit within a couple of weeks. Patrick McHugh described Donal as a fit man with not a care in the world. On Easter Sunday morning, Commandant O'Hannigan mobilised in Dundalk and headed for Dublin with upwards of 100 men following him. Just before they reached Slane in County Meath, a messenger from Dundalk caught up with them with the countermanding order, which had been issued by Owen MacNeill. This ad appeared in the newspapers saying that the Easter manoeuvres effectively were off. Nothing was going to happen. MacNeill, the commander-in-chief of the Irish Volunteers, had been somewhat hoodwinked by the IRB members of his executive. They were proceeding with a rebellion. He wasn't too pleased when he found this out. He was an academic based at UCD, a history professor, and he did his best to stop the rising. Now, unlike many other units on receipt of the order, the countermanding order, Hannigan did not allow the Louth Volunteers to disband. Arthur Green noted that Hannigan said he was not taking orders from MacNeill. Pearse was his commanding officer. He decided they should camp at Slane until messengers could clarify the situation. According to Peter Kieran, they occupied Johnson's bakery in Slane. The first messenger sent did not return, adding further to the confusion and disappointment of the Louth men. In the early hours of Easter Monday, Hannigan instructed Seán McEntee to travel to Dublin on the 4 a.m. mail train from Drogheda. He gave McEntee directions to his uncle's house, Daniel Cleary, his mother's brother, who lived in Dorset Street. At 4:30 a.m., he instructed the remaining volunteers to set out for home. They left Slane accompanied by 2 RAC constables who had followed them from they left Dundalk the day before. It was a very wet night, so the policeman very kindly offered to waken the owner of Dunnigan's pub in Cullen so that they might get refreshments. Mrs. Dunnigan let them in, and many of the young men had soft drinks, but one noted that Dan Hannigan had a pint of creamy porter. By noon, they had reached Ardee, and O'Hannigan told the Dunleer contingent to return home and await further orders. At about 3:30 p.m. on Easter Monday, the volunteers arrived at Logan Green outside Dundalk. Here, Seán McEntee caught up with them with instructions from Pádraig Pearse to carry out their original orders as instructed. They returned to Castlebellingham. They just would have been a couple of miles north of Castlebellingham to reorganise, and there, having held up cars returning from the Fairyhouse races, they commandeered some of the cars and drivers and they decided to leave for Meath once again. While in a shop in Castlebellingham, a fracas broke out with some of the people they had apprehended. A British officer, Lieutenant Charles Dunville of the Irish Guards, was wounded, and an RAC constable named McGee was killed. Hannigan said he got medical aid for the 2 men, although he said he realised McGee was dead. The convoy set out for Meath once again, and unfortunately en route to Tara, when they arrived there at dawn on Easter Tuesday, he was now down to 10 men because the convoy became separated on the journey. Throughout Tuesday, other volunteers joined them, and so they occupied Tyrrell's townhouse. He now had 23 men under his command. On Wednesday, they were joined by Sean Boylan and the Meath Volunteers. Through the week, O'Hannigan tried to link up with Thomas Ashe and the Fingal Volunteers, but to no avail. He realised as the week ended that it was all over. Pearse had surrendered and Ashe was a prisoner. On Monday, May the 2nd, O'Hannigan decided to break camp. He instructed the Dundalk people to go home, although some of them were billeted around Dunboyne. Seán McEntee later wrote, "It was not by their own volition that theirs was a bloodless campaign. That was the dispensation of Providence. But if the opportunity had been afforded to them, they would have proved themselves as gallant as any that ever fought in the nation's cause." Donal acquired a bicycle himself and headed for Galway, where he believed the rebels were holding out. In Mullingar, he learned it was all over, with rebels being arrested everywhere. So he then decided to go to Mitchelstown, where his brother Jim lived. So he was effectively returning back home. About this time, the Police Gazette Hue and Cry reported, "Wanted, Hannigan, Christian name not known, otherwise known as Limerick, and also Riley. native of Dublin, supposedly, who stands charged with having, on the 24th day of April 1916, in the barony of Ardee, parish of Gernanstown, committed high treason and complicity in the murder of Constable Charles McGee. He's described as being a square-built man, walks wide, light brown moustache, Dublin accent, speaks fluently, grey eyes, regular nose, fair sunburned complexion, strong face, stout, active make, approximate weight 12 stone, 5 foot 10 inches high, about 35 years of age, and he looks like a soldier or a Navy man. I don't know how they sort of realised how much a Navy man was going to take part in his further career. The Rising may have come to an end, but was only the start of Donal Hannigan's work for Ireland. During his time back in the South, according to Florence O'Donoghue, in his biopic, No Other Law, The Life of Liam Lynch, he says that the young Lynch met O'Hannigan. Donal said he took the opportunity to enroll Lynch into the IRB. O'Donoghue related, Lynch longed to meet someone who had taken part in the fighting in Dublin and to learn from him every detail of the historic week. A farmer from the Galties told him in Barry's shop that he had one of the men who took part staying with him. Liam Lynch made arrangements to meet the man on the run. He was delighted to discover him to be another Galtee man, a not too distant neighbour, Donal O'Hannigan. Liam brought him at once to Barnagorha, where he stayed for some time. Tom Lynch, a brother of Liam Lynch, returned from college soon afterwards and devoted himself to zealously protecting the safety of their visitor. Liam visited them frequently, and there was only one subject on which he would talk, and that was the Irish Republic. Tom Lynch, a brother of Liam, was a clerical student. Their home was just outside Angleboro, where Donal had come from. Now, we skip over to the second brother, the youngest, Donnacha O'Hannigan. Donnacha did not mobilise in 1916, due mainly to a breakdown in communication. He was working in Nina. He contacted Captain James Ledden, who was the senior man in Limerick and later a TD for Limerick, and was assured he would be kept informed, but he received no further word. Obviously, there were no mobile phones or internet to send, but he said that had he known what was going on in Dublin, he'd have simply took the train from Nina to Dublin. It was that simple, but he could do nothing. In the aftermath, he helped Michael O'Callaghan escape from Tipperary and secured him passage to the USA on the same boat that Donal sailed on in Liverpool. O'Callaghan's episode was quite an interesting one, and probably there was great debate in 2016 as the first event of the Rising, where O'Callaghan lived in the Glen of Aherlow in Tipperary. He killed a police sergeant and a police constable, and that was on the Wednesday before Good Friday. So it could be well argued as perhaps being the first event of the Rising. Donnacha continued to work for the cause and helping his brother Anne O'Callaghan escape. And in 1918, he was in command of the volunteer unit in the area, which would eventually become the East Limerick Brigade. However, there was a dispute about the leadership, and it's best explained from a book I received from Ballylanders quite recently. And it basically says 1918 was a turbulent year in Ballylanders, with two of the leading members of the Irish Volunteers, Donnacha O'Hannigan of Angleboro and Liam Monaghan of Ballylanders, taking opposite sides against each other in a bitter dispute. The dispute arose during a meeting in Glenbrahan earlier that year, organised by Donnacha O'Hannigan, with a view to swearing in some of the Irish volunteers to the Irish Republican Brotherhood. Some of the members were not in favour of joining what they saw as a secret society. And that problem was multiplied all around the country. Lots of people had problems with the notion of joining a secret society. Commandant Monaghan was accused of carrying out manoeuvres in Galway on Easter Sunday 1916, despite the fact that General MacNeill had cancelled the rising. The episode left a bad feeling among the volunteers and divided those who obeyed orders on Easter Sunday and those who felt that the rebellion should have gone ahead. A split arose among the local volunteers, with rank-and-file members taking opposite sides against each other. The Hanniganites and the Monaghanites were the new two groupings. The Sinn Féin cabinet of Dáil Éireann became concerned with the matter in Ballylanders, and a court of inquiry was ordered. The inquiry was held at the home of Danny Maloney, Bridge House, Knocklong, under the chairmanship of Commandant Michael O'Reilly. As the meeting progressed, some of the volunteers felt that it was more like a court-martial than an inquiry. The court found that the only way to solve the dispute was that the Galtee Brigade of the Irish Volunteers should be disbanded and reorganised. A number of officers protested and felt that Commandant O'Reilly had no right to dissolve the brigade. Lieutenant Mick Scandon and Captain Michael Quirk of Galway persisted to argue their case until Commandant O'Reilly suspended both of them from the Irish Volunteers. Commandant Monaghan was then ordered to attend a battalion meeting in Glenbrahan, but refused to do so considering what happened to the other two officers. He was then suspended from the volunteers. Caught in a quandary between romantic nationalism and a new type of republicanism, he took a brave decision to leave the area and try and save the fragmented volunteer movement. He later accepted an appointment with the Irish Agricultural Organisation in Waterford. The old Galtee Brigade was now replaced by the East Limerick Brigade. To preserve the historic name of the old Galtee Brigade, 3 new battalions were formed, the 4th, 2nd and 3rd Galtee battalions. In an unprecedented move, GHQ in Dublin decided to appoint the officers. This was a new departure from the norm because there was always tradition going back to our Celtic chieftains to elect leaders. Seán T. O'Regan of Kilmallock was appointed commandant in charge of the 4th Galtee Battalion, which included the districts of Angleboro, Ballylanders, Galway, Kilfinane, Knocklong, Adpatrick and Kilbreheny. Donnacha O'Hannigan of Anglesborough was appointed second in command of the 4th Galtee Battalion, with Brigadier Sean Wall of Bruff as the officer commanding the East Limerick Brigade. John Joe Crawford was appointed captain of the Ballylanders Company. In spite of their independent officers being appointed, this dispute continued to persist. It just wasn't going to disappear with the stroke of a pen. An officers' meeting was held at Ned Tobin's house in Glenbrahan around the end of February 1919, with a view to attacking the Royal Irish Constabulary Barracks in Ballylanders. The barracks was in the centre of the dispute area, and an engagement might just unite the two IRA factions. Thomas Malone, alias Sean Ford, was born in a little village of Tyrrell's Pass in County Westmeath and was on the run, having been released from Wakefield Prison in 1917. Malone was a very experienced IRA freedom fighter, organiser and a close friend of Michael Collins. His involvement in the Republic movement is well documented in a biography of his life by his son, alias Sean Ford. During the armed struggle, Malone used the alias Sean Ford to avoid detection from the British intelligence services. Even for a few years after the truce, many of the volunteers were not aware of his full identity. Sometime in 1919, Michael Collins sent Thomas Malone to East Limerick to organise a loan set up for Dáil Éireann. Further on from this, Collins remarked to Malone that he was fed up with the foolishness going on between the Hanniganites and the Monaghanites in Ballylanders. Collins put it to Malone that the fact that he was neutral, he could just be the right person to get Limerick men back in the fight. Ford was encouraged to organise a meeting of the local officers and come up with a plan to get the Limerick men fighting again. Strangely enough, Donnacha O'Hannigan was invited to organise the attack, but Liam Monaghan was not. Malone was automatically appointed vice officer commanding the East Limerick Brigade, which went outside the normal protocol of having a brigade meeting where a vote would be taken to elect an officer. Seán T. O'Riordan, the battalion officer from Kilmallock, was annoyed at this because as far as he was concerned, he was in charge of the operation. So Hannigan, for all the debates, he was brought back in as commander. The old foes started to put their differences behind them with a sense of urgency after being inspired by the Solo Head Beg ambush and the subsequent rescue of Seán Hogan at Knocklang. The old romanticism of the Irish Volunteers was gone and replaced by a more militant IRA, the Irish Republican Army, which the O'Hannigans had backed from day one. From the establishment of the East Limerick Brigade, Donnacha was involved in events at Kilmallock, Ballylanders, Lekelly, Kildorrery, Grange, Drumkean. He is credited with having invented the notion of a flying column and also with shooting down a British aeroplane at Kilfinane. So that was the first ground-to-air missile ever used. He served as a Major General in the new Free State Army. And in Limerick, during the Civil War, he negotiated a truce with Liam Lynch to stop hostilities between both sides. However, headquarters interfered, and General O'Duffy is the man credited with causing all the problems in Limerick. Shortly after the Civil War, Donnacha decided to move into the civil service. So he gave up his rank of Major General in the new army and settled into a civil service career. His niece Etna always believed that Liam Lynch's family and the O'Hannigans were related. And perhaps that's the reason why the two guys were able to negotiate a peace. They weren't going to fight with each other. So that's Donnacha's career. Moving over then to the eldest brother, James, or Seamus, as he was known. He was aged 40 in 1916, and his wife, Kate, and himself mobilised on both Holy Thursday and on Easter Sunday in Mitchelstown. They disbanded when they received the countermanding order, and in the arrest that followed Easter, Jim was sent to Wakefield Prison and then Frongach Camp in Wales. The newspaper reported that Mr. James Hannigan, who was absent from the town at the time, surrendered on hearing he was wanted. The majority were released that night, the following being retained: William Casey, James Hannigan, Michael Sullivan, Patrick Sullivan, and Patrick Roach. It is understood that the whole trouble was caused by the retention of arms known to be in the possession of the members of the organisation, and that the retained members will be released today as the missing arms are said to have been handed in to the authorities. They had 50 rifles. It must be said that Mitchelstown and district remained perfectly normal during the recent troubles, and with no interference with the authorities having been reported. That was the RIC report. Donal said that when he arrived there, he had implored Jim and the other men not to hand over the rifles, but they did. On his return to Mitchelstown on Christmas Eve 1916, it was noted by Michael O'Sullivan that Jim was in poor health. He was a changed man. Prison life had been hard on him. He took no further part in the volunteers. Recent research that shown that Jim was a founder member of the Gaelic League and the Irish Volunteers in Mitchelstown. He was a great supporter of Arthur Griffith and Sinn Féin, always encouraging young people to read Griffith's The Resurrection of Hungary. Daniel O'Keefe said that all the Easter 1916 organising was carried out in Hannigan's house in Mitchelstown. It's interesting to note that when he mobilised, his wife Kate mobilised along with him. She's the only woman on the list that mobilised there in Mitchelstown. He worked as a rep for Singer sewing machines, and he held the rank of adjutant in 1916. His wife was Kate O'Connor, and in 1916, it should be noted, Jim was 42 years of age. So another commentator said that they regarded Jim as an old man because they were all in their teens and 20s when they took up the role. And perhaps the reason of his age, perhaps that's why the internment worked against him. I read a piece from a newspaper in Mitchelstown where it described how in the last few years, some trees were removed from outside the boundary of St. Fanahan's College. They said the trees had been planted by Jim O'Hannigan almost 100 years ago. He had planted 15 trees from the boundary of the college up to the Presentation School entrance in Mitchelstown to honour the memory of the 15 men who were executed after the 1916 Rising. They said the trees were never marked by a plaque, and over the years they've been uprooted because they caused an obstruction to the car parks. So one of the final trees was removed in 2008, and hence the controversy in the paper. Many people, it said, in Mitchelstown wouldn't be aware of the significance of the trees, but they were planted in the 1920s by Jim Hannigan and his brother Donnacha, who was the father of a local nun, Sister Carmel. And for years, students and local people have walked by these trees, unaware that each tree commemorated the loss of a brave life in the 1916 Rising. Jim Hannigan died in 1936, aged 63 years. The rosary was recited in Irish. His 1916 comrades did the guard of honour at his funeral. He's survived by his widow Kate and a son called Patrick. And he had also become an employee of the New Ireland Assurance Company, which was set up in Frangach in the aftermath of the 1916 Rising. And its company offices all over Ireland, from Dundalk to Mullingar to Athlone down to Cork and Mitchelstown, were places that provided employment for IRA men. So it's not surprising to find that Jim Hannigan worked there. So he was the eldest brother and the first to die. Meanwhile, let's take a look at what Donal was at. Donal visited Dublin in August 1916 and found the city a changed place. He returned to Cork and renewed acquaintance with his old friend Seán O'Hegarty, another man who was on the run. They put together a proposal to send men to Germany to train in high explosives and other military matters. It was agreed that Donal should go to the USA and seek support from John Devoy to finance their plans. Donal managed to get a ship at Court McSherry to Wales. He was arrested there, where he gave his name as Cleary, his mother's surname, but was later released. He then went to Liverpool, where Steve Lanigan and Neil Kerr of the IRB helped him. From Liverpool, he sailed to Baltimore, USA, eventually going to New York and meeting John Devoy. Frank Robbins, a citizen army man from Dublin, writing in a book he called Under the Starry Plough, gave an account of the period. He was also in New York in the aftermath of the Rising, and he said he was delighted to meet Donal O'Hannigan at the Philo-Irish Society on Madison Avenue, New York. Hannigan introduced him to Liam Mellows, who had also arrived there. John Devoy, at a meeting in the Shamrock Club, noted that Donal Hannigan, Captain Monteith, Liam Mellows and Michael O'Callaghan, who he mentioned earlier, were all wanted by British intelligence, so they should be careful of their movements. Devoy approved of Hannigan's proposal, but it was not implemented until the spring of 1917, when Devoy instructed Donal to return to Ireland. He was to arrange for the landing of a German submarine at a suitable site on the Irish coast. He had spent the previous 6 months living and working in the Battery area of New York. He secured a post on the SS Baltic and he sailed to Southampton. On his arrival back in Dublin in late September 1917, a week before Thomas Ashe died, he contacted Michael Collins and Dermot Lynch at their headquarters in Bachelor's Walk. He advised them of the plan and proceeded south to study the coastline to identify a landing place. While in the south of the country, he learned in the media his colleagues had been arrested in New York and the German plan was aborted. Donal then returned to the US to help Devoy reorganize the original plan and to contact the German agents involved. Early in March 1918, he returned to Dublin on the SS Cedric, travelling under the name of Dan Kennedy. This is the photograph from his passport of the time. And also, this is a stamp showing various places that he booked into. Obviously, the early ones are forgeries, as the best part of it probably would be. In the middle of all this skipping back and forward, he still managed to have an odd photograph taken with some of his colleagues in the States. And he also, on St. Patrick's Day 1918, he found time to marry Cathy Mohan, a native of Mellifont in County Louth. Under these instructions from Michael Collins, in June 1918, Donal signed on board the SS Argo and sailed to Norway to find a discreet route to Germany. His contact in Stavanger, a Norwegian seaport, was caught by the authorities, and Donal had to stay on board ship to avoid being arrested himself. His ship then sailed to Newcastle on Tyne, where all the sailors were paid off on landing there. He got on board a Russian freighter called the Smolensk and returned to Stavanger once again. This time he learned that the Great War was coming to an end and the Germans could offer no help to Ireland. So he returned to Bristol and was back in Dublin by November 18. The month World War I came to an end. Donal was then requested by Collins to make arrangements and keep himself ready at Liverpool to bring a number of VIPs to the USA. On the 4th of May, Harry Boylan was brought to Liverpool and on to New York. And on the 1st of June, Eamon de Valera joined him by the same Liverpool route, all arranged by Donal on the instructions of Michael Collins. As Donal noted in one document, it was a case of Liverpool today, New York tomorrow. Eamon de Valera later acknowledged Donal's work for getting to him America in a letter to the department. As well as smuggling VIPs, Donal became adept at smuggling guns, delivering consignments from New York, Paris, London and Manchester and Liverpool to both Dublin and Cork on many occasions. He supplied the armaments for the Knocklong rescue. He liaised on many occasions with the import agent Robert Briscoe, later the Lord Mayor of Dublin, during this time. In late May 1919, Donal arranged for the safe transportation to the USA of J.J. O'Brien and Edward Scanlon, who had both been wounded, helping Dan Breen rescue Sean Hogan from the RIC at Knocklong. So as well as providing the guns, he also helped the casualties. Remarkably, or not surprisingly, I suppose, at this time, he gained the nickname the Atlantic Greyhound because he was never done moving back and forth across the Atlantic. In 1921, Michael Collins instructed him to come back to Dublin, where he was involved in operations in the city, including a shootout with Black and Tans in Earl Street and the killing of two of the enemy at St. James's Gate. After the truce in 1921, Donal decided to take no part in the Civil War. He helped to set up the non-violent IRA organisation to try and broker a peace between the two sides in the conflict. His address at the time was 19 Mead Street, Dublin. General Joe O'Reilly, Collins's right-hand man, wrote that Donal was held in the highest esteem by Michael Collins. Seán Boylan's letter confirmed that by 1925, Donal had moved to Thomas Street in Dublin, where he had commenced work as a merchant. On the 31st of December 1935, Donal applied for his well-deserved pension for his services to the country. Sadly, it took 6 years of negotiation to secure his pension. This is a photograph of the non-violent IRA meeting first set up in Dublin. Don't have any names for it, so I can't tell you who it is. Donnacha was refused the pension for services prior to 1916, and in the end he said he did not want one. He just wanted a service medal. Jim did not apply, even though he had suffered broken health. One positive note, Donal's application left a wealth of knowledge about his career at the time. In 1956, at Dundalk, he was presented with a scroll of honour by Eamon de Valera, with other veterans standing round. This is a photograph from the event. A plaque on the wall of the John Boyle O'Reilly Hall commemorates the fact that the Dundalk volunteers left this hall on Easter Sunday to take part. Donal continued then to work at the forecourts. In 1959, he died suddenly at his home on St. Jarlath Road, Cabra in Dublin, and is buried in Glasnevin Cemetery. He was aged 76. The Irish Times obituary simply noted, Commandant Donal O'Hannigan. The funeral of Commandant Donal O'Hannigan, 95 St. Jarlath Road, Cabra, took place to Glasnevin Cemetery after a requiem mass in the Church of Christ the King, Cabra, celebrated by Reverend Father Angus from Terenure College, assisted by Father O'Leary from Rathfarnham Castle. His brother and his own children were the chief mourners. There was a firing party from the National Army and the coffin was draped in a tricolour. Donal's grandson, who sadly recently passed away, in 1916, with the organisation of the great Meath historian Noel French, read the proclamation on the Hill of Tara, exactly 100 years since his grandfather had set out to do so. So it's proper that we include Donal Óg, shall we say, in the talk, just to remember him here, standing to the right of the picture. Commandant Donal O'Hannigan, perhaps one of the key figures of the War of Independence, indeed the whole independence struggle. If ever a family and a band of brothers had dedicated their life to a cause, there's no one could deny that the O'Hannigans did. Major General Donnacha O'Hannigan died on the 23rd of August 1962 at his home in Fortfield Park, Terenure, aged 72. The last of the band of brothers. Thank you very much.
Oh, well done, Seán. That was fantastic. And I think you did everybody proud with that. And it's an awful shame that they have been left out of history. And I found that you were so great in terms of getting their names back out there. We have a few questions. There is a mention from Patrick Pearce and James Connolly in the GPO of a large band from Dundalk making it to Dublin. What I was wondering was, did Donal O'Hannigan keep in contact with those in Dundalk, after 1916 or not?
I only ever heard one comment, and my mother met Donal O'Hannigan because she was a friend of his daughter's, Etna. And he once made a remark to my mother that he had been in Dundalk for the unveiling of the plaque, and they got him to read the proclamation, which I assume was 1956. Yeah. And he said he was astounded at the crowd that were present. He wondered where they all were in 1916.
Yeah, I'd well believe it. John Flannery has asked, what did Donnacha work at in Nenagh?
I assume it doesn't say clearly what he did, but I would assume it was in the horticultural business because that's what he had trained as. He was a horticulturist.
Sure. And let's see. Yeah, just for me, I was shown a number of documents from the O'Hannigan family about the neutral IRA. How important were they during the Civil War? You mentioned but possibly them being related to Liam Lynch.
I think there was a strong possibility perhaps they were related to Lynch. If you're down in Angleboro, you'll see how close they lived beside each other. But Etna always believed that they were cousins, and that was the reason the conflict didn't happen between them in Limerick. From the point of view of the non-violent IRA, effectively it was a lost cause. They tried, but the Civil War ensued, and there was nothing they could do to stop that. Okay.
Johnny Doyle has said the propeller from the Kilfinane aircraft mentioned is on display at the National Museum. And let's see, Hala has mentioned that, she's read many books on 1916 to 23, but there's been no information about the O'Hannigans, that generally wouldn't be seen as mentioned as much. Why is that, do you think?
I feel they didn't become involved politically Most of the people that I mentioned ended up as TDs, ministers, and various other departments if they weren't killed. The O'Hannigans stepped away. Donal Hannigan took no further part. And I think that can be seen when you read their pension applications, which are available online from the military archives. And you can see the job they came up against to actually get pensions. Donal campaigned for 6 years, eventually ending up in court to get the pension he deserved.
Really?
Yet minions, or some of his minions, I came across one, I won't get into names, but one fellow who took an active part in one political party applied for a pension at the same time. And the judge advocate said, well, you all know who this man is, so we just give him his pension.
Yeah, there was such like double standards with those pensions. Absolutely.
And Donnacha had a similar argument because he was employed as a civil servant. They didn't want to pay him a pension as well. Really? And there are all sorts of records and notes to be read into that. Okay. But I think the fact that they didn't become political, that they didn't take part in, as many other men walked away on the whole notion of the Civil War, they didn't want to be part of that. And who could blame them? They'd been fighting and struggling together for almost 15 years at that stage. And now they were going to start shooting at each other, which was probably the saddest part of our history.
Absolutely. Let's see. So John Malloy has said, brilliant delivery. Johnny Doyle has said, a very good presentation. Huge amount of info there. Andrew Deneen, great talk. Thanks. John Flannery, excellent talk. Well done. Sheila, really enjoyed this. Thank you. Hala, fantastic talk. Thank you, Sean. Dolores, great history of the O'Hannigans. Patrick Kilfeather, we owe a debt of gratitude to the O'Hannigan brothers for the part they played in the fight for freedom. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Liam O'Sullivan, the 6 years that it took to get a pension for someone and clearly involved in the struggle, sadly can also be seen elsewhere too. What are Sean's thoughts on the reason this process took so long? It must have been intensely frustrating for applicants.
I think it was very politically motivated because, the winners write the history, not the losers. And, that's about as I suppose, as Christian I can be in commenting on that.
Very diplomatic answer. But no, but because like the Irish Citizen Army had awful trouble in terms of pensions. I know that there were even like Sean Tracy's mother had issues in terms of getting money. It's really, really interesting seeing the double standards in it. Let's see. Larry O'Brien has asked me to ask you about the 3 brigades in the East Limerick flying column. Would you know anything about that?
I wouldn't be an expert on that period. I was fortunate to get a very recent publication from Ballylandus, which explained the whole conflict in relation to O'Hannigan. And it was something I'd been trying to understand for years. So I have to compliment the people in Ballylandus that produced the booklet. And they would be the people I'd refer them to.
Okay. Des Dalton, thanks, Sean. Fascinating talk. Seamus Lynham, really enjoyed learning about the Hannigan brothers and their activities and contribution to Irish independence. Thank you. James Carton, really enjoyed that. Well presented. Rev has said great research, Sean from Nigel. And Ricardo Alberio, beautiful talk. Thanks, Sean. And Mary Anmar, really fantastic presentation. Another new part of our history brought to the fore. Thanks, Sean. And Larry O'Brien, great talk. Thanks. And I have to say, in 2015, when we were trying to tell County Louth's story, it was thanks to you, really, that we managed to get the story out there. So thank you so much. I think you're one of County Louth's best historians. Thanks very much, Sean. And we get a virtual round of applause, but you know the way Zoom works. Okay, so thanks a million again for having us, Sean, and we should have this up on YouTube very shortly.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.